Princess Catherine's declaration, which came just as the monarchy appeared to be subtly regaining ground, shocked even the most experienced royal observers. A fourth child after silent murmurs, withdrawal, and illness. But this was more than a resuscitation. It was a loud proclamation of power, defiance, and mystery. Why now? Why do you speak so softly? And what does that really mean for the future of the crown? Before we get into more detail about what this truly means for the royal family, make sure to subscribe so you don't miss any updates. The timing was hardly coincidental, but no one expected it. The news was conveyed with the weight of a regal decree and the closeness of a whispered confession. Catherine, the Princess of Wales, said she was expecting her fourth child just a few months after completing her cancer treatment, a condition that had forced her into seclusion, away from cameras, away from royal duties, and for a while away from hope. In an instant, headlines erupted. Commentators attempted to decipher the situation. The monarchy, which had hitherto been seen as cool and calculating, was suddenly immersed in a tornado of emotions and speculation. Was Catherine recovering her story or reinventing it? Some perceived it as a mother's decision to choose happiness despite everything, a triumph of resilience. Some, however, took longer to celebrate. They mumbled about recklessness and peril. Citing her uncertain recovery, they questioned if William had given his assent, whether the palace had been informed, and whether the king had been informed, since, if this pregnancy had been planned, it had been done covertly. The repercussions would have been far more severe if it hadn't. Social media is divided. Half of the world praised her as the Phoenix Princess for her courage in recovering from illness. The other half was unconvinced. Conspiracy theories spread widely. Was this a distraction, a deliberate effort to deflect attention from the king's deteriorating health? Was it real at all? Behind the gleaming palace walls, the atmosphere grew gloomy. Inside, divisions began to appear. Senior assistants were unprepared. Some were reportedly furious over being kept in the dark. Some were concerned that the narrative might spiral out of control. Throughout it all, one woman, the one in the middle of this storm, remained composed, silent, and unrepentant. Without ever waiting for approval, the media was always speculating. Would it be a boy, another naughty prince to accompany Louis and George? Or a girl who is a reflection of Charlotte and may have been born in a different light? Would the royal succession be realigned, or would this baby just make the already strained relationships within the organization worse? Whatever the answers, one thing appeared clear. This wasn't simply about a baby. It was about a lady who refused to allow the script to define her, perception, and power. But we must return to the shadows, where stillness was a purposeful halt rather than a condition of tranquility, in order to understand how a single woman's womb could bring such royal tumult. Before the news, there was nothing but silence. As Catherine vanished from the public eye, fear grew. Not even the most tenacious photographers could find her. There was a growing sense that something deeper and darker was taking place behind the palace walls, but there were no far-off sightings or hospital leaks. The silence was oppressive. At first, it was written off as a typical retreat, family time, and privacy after recovery, but the weeks passed. After skipping one event, another was skipped. As Easter drew near, the Princess of Wales was not to be seen. No one from the palace appeared to be able or ready to answer queries, and her absence became too obvious to ignore. The public started to feel uneasy. In an attempt to capitalize on the void left behind, tabloid headlines grew bolder and more intrusive as concern erupted on social media. Even the most vigorous media outlets, nevertheless, had challenges. There were no trustworthy sightings, no health updates, and no insider guarantees. All that was uttered to a small gathering of people was the terrifying order, "Stay quiet." After that, the rumor mill went into overdrive. Behind the scenes, the palace was completely under lockdown. Royal aides, who usually agree to brief off the record, reportedly tightened their grip. William continued to attend public gatherings, but something had changed. Suddenly, the once calm, self-assured heir felt constricted and distracted. He halted in the middle of a statement at one event, and cameras caught him blinking back tears. Body language analysts speculated, but one thing was certain. He looked like a man carrying an excessive amount of weight. The nation's memory was lengthy. Kate's cancer news had just stunned the entire globe. She had waged a silent, honorable, and vulnerable war. Now the fear returned. Was she ill again? Had the treatment failed? The country was already stunned and braced for the worse as King Charles's condition worsened. People feared that a second heartbreak was taking place behind closed doors. Then there were rumors, quiet, desperate rumors, that Catherine had been seen entering a private clinic while under close observation. There were whispers that she had fainted at home, that William had scheduled time to spend with her, that nothing was said, and that the palace was silent. The speculation grew darker. Some newspapers mentioned a miscarriage. Others claimed that months of illness and stress had resulted in emotional repercussions and a psychiatric breakdown. Conspiracy theorists even went so far as to assert that the pregnancy had never occurred, or worse, that the palace was preparing for an inexplicable public catastrophe. But there was a much more complex process going on, which neither the general public nor even royal employees fully understood. It is not a catastrophe or a collapse, but a secret. Catherine was using all of her last might to defend it, because rather than sadness or farewell, the hush that eventually broke signaled the beginning of something no one dared to expect. No stage, no press conference, no family gathering. Catherine didn't wait for approval from the palace. She went straight up to the people. With a low voice and steely conviction, she delivered the news on her own terms. The monarchy has been unable to function normally ever since. In a grainy, poorly lit video that was shared on official social media platforms, Catherine was seen by herself. There were no staff, title flags, or royal symbols in the backdrop as she sat calmly and looked directly into the camera. With a sigh that seemed heavier than the moment itself, she said it. "William and I are expecting our fourth child." The world stopped. In less than 2 minutes, a single, calm yet forceful voice demolished the entire edifice of royal concealment. There was no build-up, no source of slow leaks, and no anticipatory headlines. The silence that had afflicted the palace had been replaced by something even more eerie. Unvarnished and unrestrained truth. Body language analysts didn't take their time. Her tone, her pauses, the way she held her hands, everything about her was scrutinized. Some perceived vulnerability, others saw flagrant defiance. They noticed that she made no mention of the palace at all. She didn't thank the family. She didn't speak from behind a platform or from inside Windsor's walls. She was no longer even smiling like she used to. Then, like an aftershock, William showed up in the photo. He placed a hand on her shoulder, glanced briefly into the camera, and said nothing. One gesture alone triggered 1,000 theories. Was it a subdued show of solidarity or protest, help or caution? Buckingham Palace was in a state of chaos. Officials rushed to draft an unwritten statement because they hadn't been notified. It took 12 hours for a formal answer to appear on the royal website. By then, the video had already surpassed audience records on a number of platforms. It was not merely a pregnancy announcement. It followed tradition to the letter. Queen Camilla was reportedly taken by surprise, and furious, not just shocked. Catherine had acted unilaterally, disobeying all royal traditions and the chain of command in the middle of a failing kingdom. While some perceived it as a betrayal, others regarded it as a proclamation of independence. Behind closed doors, tensions were high. Some people said it was refreshing, others referred to it as reckless. But it was impossible to ignore the shift it represented. Catherine was not going to wait to be given a voice. She had taken hold of it. Additionally, once it was taken, it was not refundable. The public's response was not unanimous. Her admirers applauded her for being brave, a modern queen who disregarded outdated restrictions. Some, though, questioned her intentions. In this sense, was she reiterating her relevance? A smokescreen that hides deeper issues inside the family, or worse, a carefully thought-out publicity gimmick to boost public sympathy for her. But all the chaos, one thing was certain. Catherine was no longer the reserved individual who smiled submissively from balconies. She had assumed a new role where her voice was both significant and crucial. But beneath the joy of a new beginning was a truth that Catherine had kept hidden from even her closest loved ones. Doctors warned that it might not happen again. After cancer, her body had endured war. Despite all warnings, medical quirks, and whispered worries, Catherine made the impossible choice, or perhaps the impossibly tough picked her. Whispered conversations were placed behind tightly shut doors, conversations that aren't meant for the general public or even some senior royals. After months of chemotherapy, her doctors had warned her that getting pregnant again would be very dangerous. Her recuperation was optimistic, but it was still risky because her body had already suffered so much. Every medical professional in her local neighborhood said that this was not the moment and maybe never will be. Though the world perceived Catherine as the cool-headed Princess of Wales, she was actually fighting something considerably more powerful than clinical caution. Longing, yearning for closure, redemption, and a kind of healing that no medicine could offer, in addition to another kid. Behind the silence, behind the public affirmations, and behind the royal walls, there was turmoil. Whispered to a few journalists, secret medical record portions discussed hormonal fluctuations, warning signs that had previously alarmed her doctors. She was going through a storm, both mentally and physically. She chose not to give up, though. Instead, she leaned into something else, something deeper. In recent months, Catherine had almost reached a spiritual state. She was seen sneaking into pews away from the royal splendor and visiting old chapels throughout the countryside. She purportedly sought solace from the burden of her obligations by going to a hidden retreat that only a select few in her close circle were aware of. It went beyond simple faith. It was about regaining control over her body, voice, and choice. Michael and Carol, Catherine's parents, tried to persuade her to slow down, but she refused. Usually her pillar of support, Carol was terrified of the perils. The always silent anchor, Michael, counseled caution, but Catherine had already decided. It was unrelated to manners. Legacy has nothing to do with it. It was personal. Sources claim that when she discovered she was pregnant again, she broke down in tears. Despite the fear, the whispers, and the storm brewing behind the royal walls, Catherine nevertheless made her choice. Not as a princess, not as a potential queen, but as a mother, a wife, and a woman determined to reclaim her own story. For years, the monarchy managed to endure by learning to keep quiet, by hiding misery under routine and feeling behind ritual. But now it feels different, because at this moment, the silence burst from within. More than ever, the globe is watching things closely, not only to assess whether the palace can handle the fallout, but also to understand the actual significance of Catherine's decision. Is this the beginning of a modern monarchy, a family that finally values honesty over perfection, or is it the start of deeper fissures that the palace can't hide? One thing, though, is undeniable. Catherine is no longer just following royal orders. She is rewriting it in real time. Whether she is seen as courageous or controversial, her impact on the future of the kingdom has never been stronger, because this story ultimately involved more than just a pregnancy. It has to do with getting by, about identity and power, and about a woman who refused to leave quietly. Perhaps the palace continues to conceal its secrets. The world is now certain of one thing, though. After Princess Catherine starts a new chapter in the history of the monarchy, nothing will ever feel the same. If you like this in-depth insight at the royal family's unsaid stories, emotional turning points, and hidden tensions, don't forget to subscribe and enable notifications. Because the impending revelation is already causing royal insiders a great deal of anxiety, trust me, it really changes everything.